All right, let's finish up 2.4. Hopefully this is a relatively easy section. Hopefully, fingers crossed. So take a minute and just copy down above the line. I'll give you time to copy the rest in a minute. So pause me. All right, so let's talk about intercepts first. What the heck are intercepts? You all know this. X-intercepts are points on the x-axis. So if I plot a bunch of points on the x-axis, normally if we were in class, I would ask you guys to tell me what those points are. This point over here is over 3 and up 0. This point right here is over 1 and up 0. And this point over here is over 2 to the left and up 0. So what do all of those points have in common? So those points all have y equal 0. The y value, the y value, the y value is 0 on all of those. So if I'm finding an x-intercept from an equation, which we're going to do down here, I'm going to make the y equal 0 because I know that that's going to force it to be on the x-axis. Y-intercepts are points on the y-axis. So if you're ever stuck and you can't remember, is the x-intercept have the y equal 0 or does the x-intercept have the x equal 0? This is kind of what I suggest that you go through, is kind of think about, okay, what do I know about x-intercepts? They're all on the axis. And then plot some points and figure out, oh, it's the y that equals 0. That's the reason I'm showing you this. So if I just randomly pick some points on the y-axis and label them, this is over 0 and up 2. This is over 0 and up 1, and this is over 0 and down 2. These all have the x value equal to 0. Okay, so that's just to help you if you forget which one's which. You can kind of go through that exercise on a quiz or a test. So go ahead and copy this down. Okay, so in order to find the x-intercept, I know it needs to be on the x-axis, which means the y has to be 0, like we just talked about. So I'm going to plug in a 0 for y. 0 times anything is 0. And I'm going to solve for x. I want you always to write your intercept as an ordered pair or a point. Okay? So dividing both sides by -1 or multiplying both sides by -1 to get that. To find the y-intercept, just like we did above, I'm going to make the x equal to 0. So I'm going to have that. Oh my goodness. I'm trying to rush. I'm trying to keep this short. So this is just 0, right? So I don't need to write that. So 2y equals 6, and dividing both sides by 2. And again, I want you to write it as an ordered pair, x comma y. So 0 comma 3. Okay. This one was x comma y, and this one was x comma y. So I'm going to plot these points over 0 and up 3. And then over 6 to the left and up 0. And then I can just connect those dots, and there's my line. Okay. So pause yourself for a second and try B on your own. All right, so let's go through that really fast. So again, for the x-intercepts, I make y equal to 0. And plus 0, I basically just wasted my ink there, right? I don't need to write plus 0. Now, be careful here. Oftentimes, students make the mistake because in their mind, they don't want to deal with fractions. So here they say x equals 2, but we know it's not x equals 2. We're dividing by 4. So what does 2 over 4 simplify to? Okay, so hopefully you said, oh, I gotta write down the time for that. It was around 4:08. Okay, hopefully you said 1/2 there. And again, we write x comma y as our ordered pair, always for intercepts. Intercepts are points on a graph. And then for the y-intercept, I'm gonna make x equal to 0. And you really don't have to write all of this out if you're comfortable jumping straight to the y equals 2. I do want you to show some work, but you don't have to show as much as I'm showing, okay? So I'm going to go over 0 and up 2 for my y-intercept. And I'm going to go over 1/2 and up 0 for my x-intercept. And I'm going to connect the dots. Okay, so this is still Algebra 1 review. All right, parallel lines have the same slope, so pause me to write that down and then we'll talk about it. Parallel lines have the same slope, and the slopes of perpendicular lines are opposite reciprocals. So I'm going to give you a couple examples of opposite reciprocals. Opposite means, you know what, let me write this down. I'm going to grab a different color. Opposite means positive versus negative. So we change the sign. And reciprocal means flip the fraction. Okay? So if I'm talking about opposite reciprocals and I start with 2, which is really 2 over 1, right? We just don't write it that way. We don't want to waste our ink. We're going to change it from a positive to a negative, and we're also going to flip the sign. Flip the fraction. So another example would be like negative 1/5, let's say. I'm going to change the sign from negative to positive, and I'm going to flip the fraction over. And then if I had like 2/3, I'm going to change the sign from positive to negative and flip the fraction. Okay, so one thing I want you to notice here is that both of these parallel and perpendicular kind of algebraic definitions reference the slope. All we care about when we're talking about these problems is the slope, and I'll tell you what I mean by that in this very next example. So take a second to copy down example 2. Again, I'll give you time to copy down example 3 when we get there. Okay, so what I meant by the whole slope thing is, when they tell me it's perpendicular to this line here, I literally want you to ignore everything except the slope. We only care about the slope, and the slope is 2. Okay, so the slope of my original line is 2. The slope of a perpendicular line, I'm going to draw a little perpendicular symbol right there, okay? The slope of a perpendicular line is going to be the opposite reciprocal, and we already talked about that right here, right? Opposite reciprocal was negative 1/2. So the slope that I want is negative 1/2. I get nothing else from this equation. I only focus on the slope when it's talking about perpendicular or parallel. So they're giving me a slope and a point. So they're telling me to use the perpendicular slope, opposite reciprocal, and use this point to write the equation. So this goes back to what we did the other day. We can use point slope form, y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1, or we can recognize, alas, haha, okay, I don't know why I'm being silly. This is the y-intercept. Over 0 and down 1, this is the y-intercept. So this tells me that b in slope-intercept form is negative 1. It's totally okay if you don't recognize that, because point slope form, which is what we're going to do over here, will work perfectly fine over here. It's just like one extra step. So I'm going to use slope-intercept form because I have a slope and an intercept. I'm plugging in the slope for the m, and I'm plugging in the y-intercept for the b. Okay, so let's look at this one. Same thing. As soon as you see parallel or perpendicular, I want you to ignore everything but the slope. The slope is all I care about. The slope of that line is 2/3, and the slope of a parallel line is also 2/3. So perpendicular, we do opposite reciprocal. Parallel, sorry, that's supposed to be a parallel symbol right there. It's kind of smushed together. Parallel is the same. Opposite reciprocal for perpendicular, same for parallel. So here they're giving me similar information. They're giving me an ordered pair, a point, and they're giving me a slope. This one doesn't have 0 for the x, so it's not a y-intercept. Okay, if you're confused about this y-intercept here, go back here. Y-intercept means x equals 0, and you can see that the x is equal to 0. That's how I knew that was a y-intercept. So on this one, I've got to do point slope form. I'm actually going to write it up here because I know I'm going to run out of space. So I'm going to go, again, I'm always going to keep writing these, and I hope that you guys do as well because it just helps get it into your brain if it's not there already. So this is my x1, y1, and this is my slope. So y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. And then just like we did, I think it was last time, we're gonna distribute. I'm not gonna write the steps because you have those written in your notes. So we're gonna distribute the 2/3, and also just like we did last time, I'm gonna add 2 to both sides, but over here, I'm gonna add a funny form of 2, okay? Because I want these to have a common denominator. So this green is exactly the same, adding 2 to both sides, but this is just so that I have a common denominator. And you can do that in 2 steps if you need to. So I get what? Y equals 2/3 x plus 4/3. Combining these, I have -2 and +6 makes +4/3. All right, last one. This will be quick, so just copy that down really fast. Okay, so for these problems, you don't have to write the equation of the line. You can actually just jump straight to graphing. When I'm graphing, when I'm given a point and a slope, I start at the point, and then I count out the slope. So I'm going to start at -3, 2. I'm actually going to label it, and I'm going to put, that's where I started. -3, 2 is where I'm starting. And maybe I'll put a number 1 here. And then the next thing I'm going to do is count out the slope. So I'm going to go rise 1 and run 2. So counting out the slope, in fact, I'll do this. Rise 1 and run 2. 1, 2. That's the second thing I did. And then I can connect the dots and be done. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna ask a silly question. Let me think to make sure you got to the bottom, to the end. What time does second period block end? So when we're on a block schedule, what time does second period end?